Okay, hi, I'm Lila Mae Price. I'm a senior, class of 26. I'm an anthropology and English double major with a Spanish minor. My English major has a creative writing concentration, and I love writing. I love writing fiction, creative nonfiction, all kinds of things. So this is my piece. It's called Shadows. You have the most beautiful smile. Wrinkled, warm, paper-crisp hands gripped mine. Cloudy blue eyes held on to every inch of me like I was a promise. I was standing in a world of confusion, of disrupted, disconcerted, purposeless life, and somehow this woman swam through it all and latched on to me like an anchor. This was the worst part of Christmas caroling, or at least it was why our ragtag miniature choir was much smaller than the usual amount of church youth group members who met at this time on Sunday evenings. People were scared of the 10 minutes that followed the conclusion of our holiday repertoire, the 10 minutes where our youth leader would say, "Go, interact with the residents," and suddenly we'd be left alone to wander through the memory care ward of the nursing home, through grisly, unnatural, unpredictable life forms, fiddling with our Santa hats in discomfort. I pretended I didn't mind. In all honesty, it didn't bother me as much as it bothered the others, because I liked thinking that I was making a difference in these people's lives. But I was nervous, too, unsettled by the strained gurgling and the dank smell and the confused stares and the hunched man who inevitably believed I was his girlfriend from the past. I would greet the residents in my cheerful manner, attempt to shake their hands, but I was often met only by blank gazes, a hollowness that suggested everything behind the eyes had long dissolved. I didn't even fully understand yet what this meant, but I was afraid of the nothingness. I remember being relieved when we got out into the parking lot and were back to being a group of carefree kids, behaving normally, interacting comfortably, forgetting the scary people in their scary rooms who had long since forgotten about us. My first experience was when I was 6. We pulled into my great aunt's driveway, tucked into the woodsy mountains of North Carolina, and my dad turned around in his seat to face me. "I want to tell you before we go in. Your aunt, she just is a little forgetful at times." I was a kid, and this meant nothing to me. Inside, I drew on pages of copy paper with her old crayon set, coloring to the rhythm of the adult chatter in the living room around me, while never really listening. I hardly knew these family members. They were the out-of-state relatives who existed as names on birthday cards and vague references at the dinner table. I was content doodling away and answering their basic conversation questions, like "How old are you?" and "How old are you?" and "How old are you?" I was asked this, among other things, around 7 times by my aunt over the course of the afternoon. I shrugged it off, played along with a little game, completely unbothered. That was the last time my family went to North Carolina, and I never saw her again after that. But I always remembered with childlike simplicity that woman on the couch who was a little forgetful. I knew what old people were supposed to be like. I had 2 grandparents that I adored, living only a 5-minute drive from my house. They were the kind of people who made me look forward to sleepovers at their place days in advance. My grandma would let me eat ice cream sandwiches for breakfast and try on her jewelry and use the fancy flowered sheets to sleep in and stay up late watching game shows with her. We were the silly pair in the back seat on road trips, the inseparable duo who shared the same name and the same joy for life. When I was in the 1st grade, we were asked about our upcoming weekends, and a girl complained she had to spend it at her grandparents' house. She groaned at the prospect, describing how boring it was to be around them, how utterly painful it was to sit in their stuffy living room and eat their bland food. It baffled me in its pure absurdity. How is that possible? Grandparents are the best thing in the world, I told her. 1. A condition characterized by progressive or persistent loss of intellectual functioning, especially with impairment of memory and abstract thinking, and often with personality change, resulting from organic disease of the brain. 2. Something that happens to the people over there, the old scary people who stare at you in the nursing home, and the distant aunt who is a little funny and forgetful, not applicable to those close to you, those that matter in your life. He was once a gentleman. That's all I could think, looking at the man in an expensive polo, his belt sophisticatedly matching his shoes. It had been several years of nursing home caroling excursions, and I had become somewhat better at humanizing the residents. It was still uncomfortable, but that was because I was talking to strangers, not because I was talking to monsters. I approached the man. One of the chaperones came up to him, too. She had noticed his A&M University ring, glinting gold between gnarled, leathery, arthritic knuckles. "I like your Aggie ring," she said, and he grinned, extended his fingers as much as he could to show it off. It was worn, the fine etching made smooth by decades of use, Perhaps from fixing the car, or mowing the lawn, or cooking dinner, or shaking people's hands, or maybe just from feeling it absent-mindedly with the opposite fingers because it's something to be proud of. He chuckled when she showed him her own ring, and side by side, the differences were stark. One was dark in the divots, tarnished and battered, decrepit from the passing time. The other was shiny, crisply molded, promising years of use before it ever showed signs of age. Did this make the older ring no longer a ring? I looked at both rings, one and the same, and I corrected myself. He is a gentleman. It was so gradual, like sand slipping away, grain by imperceptible grain. I watched memories fade softly, things slowly disappear, names and faces and abilities and recipes and routines. The same outfit 2 days in a row, the double and triple check of what time the appointment will be. Don't forget the flowered sheets. Which ones? The ones I always use when I stay here. There were shadows growing in my grandma's mind. The Alzheimer's Foundation of America says, when used appropriately, music can shift mood, manage stress-induced agitation, stimulate positive interactions, facilitate cognitive function, and coordinate motor movements. I would watch the most incoherent, glassy-eyed resident bob their head to our Christmas carols. Women who could no longer talk mouthed the words along with us. A crooked-postured man in a wheelchair mimicked conducting with jerky but precise movements. Happiness. I was a terrified child, and the monsters around me were smiling and dancing. Our festive music curled around the room like a sweet fragrance that everyone instinctively raises their noses to catch. I felt swaddled in it with everyone else, and I promised myself I would one day be that woman in the back, clapping together the parts of her bent, swollen hands that could still touch, stomping her orthopedic shoes in perfect time. It was not so scary anymore. My grandma was shape-shifting, becoming the nursing home people who existed as figures of strangeness, detached, fragmented, their minds mangled by the shadows within, their faces distant and disconnected and frightening. Like the defined symptoms list predicted, it became impossible for her to function normally in social situations, which is a cold, analytical way of saying that she lost a part of her, the part that made and served Thanksgiving dinner for the whole family and was friendly with all the regulars at church and played dominoes every Tuesday with her longtime friends down the street. But she somehow kept her sense of humor, and she remembered me. We shared an inside joke about this, one that neither of us ever really understood, but it was funny. We would laugh about nothing in particular, and that was still ours. I wrote in high school, the most difficult goodbyes are the ones that are permanent, but even more so are the ones that linger uncertainly as time elapses, elongating the morning as closure dances elusively in the future. Instead of a death, I was grieving the dying, and each loss as the illness progressed seemed to reopen the same wound. I cried over the loss of something that wasn't missed by anyone but me. She didn't remember it herself, and no one shared the exact relationship I had with her. I wondered if she knew deep down what was missing. I wondered if she was sad too. But she still laughed. I mourned, but I laughed too. I overheard someone talking once, and they said, if I ever get dementia, pull the plug on me. That's no life to live. I resented that statement, fumed quietly about the sorrow of someone who didn't understand the beauty within the beast. It took me a long time to realize why it bothered me so much, why I felt so defensive of a life I had never lived. The nursing home woman still grasped my hands firmly, her hazy, hollow aquamarine eyes locked on mine with a furtive sharpness. You have the most beautiful smile, she repeated. She pulled me in closer, and I could see the sparkle of tears. Inexplicably, my eyes began to water as well. Life is going to be hard, but if you learn to smile at it will all be easier. And she smiled at me a little bit, a deep optimism in the flash of her crooked teeth, showing me exactly how she had made it this far. I couldn't help but smile back, and it was just the two of us in the world, on opposite sides of the chasm of life itself, grinning at each other and finding hope in each other and seeing in each other the beauty that we both live for. There is nothing wrong with the shadows, if you can smile about the shade. Thank you.
I've never had on a microphone before. My name's Alyssa Taylor. I'm from Forney, Texas, which is east of Dallas. I'm an English major, and I have a minor in secondary education for 7 through 12. I love to write. I like to write in my free time, and this is the first time I'm ever reading in front of people, so that's really exciting. I'm getting used to sharing my writing with other people, so I'm very thankful that I get to do this. I'm really happy all of you guys are here. This is called How I Failed to Save the World. I've begun to look like them. I walk like them. My voice sounds like them, my hair even sometimes. I smell like them, and at night I watch them on my phone, and I wonder if it's all true and this is the way they are. I did it like you wanted me to. Can I stop now? And you might have said yes a long time ago, but I didn't hear that part. I was too busy looking at my phone or reading or buying a subscription to watch the show you're talking about. I draw the line at the book trilogies and the music. The music is just terrible, and the books really do me in. Sometimes we talk, and I have to manually check how my face looks, but then I feel like you know that I have to manually check how my face looks, and that's why we don't speak anymore, and everybody has moved to the row in front of me now. It makes me sick to be around you, if I'm completely honest. It makes me sick. And in any other world or situation, I'd be so happy to see you doing poorly. In this one, though, I give you a hug when you cry, and I mean it. And I don't know what that means about us. I hate you, and I mean it. And I don't know what that means either. I think it's something about my smile that they see through. It might be my clothes or the way my water bottle may or may not have mold in it. I think they could tell no matter how many times I wash it. I've been told many times that I'm an opinionated person, and I think I probably argue too much. I don't agree at all, but then that would prove everybody's point. I think there's a part of me that hates to agree with many people, but I genuinely do think everybody is wrong about almost pretty much everything pretty often, and maybe that's what they don't like about me. I don't care, and I don't enjoy them either, but it still makes me feel weird when they all look at me when they leave the room. I don't know how to help people. Am I evil to you? Is it because of God? Is it because of that part? Am I too girlish, or am I too boyish in some ways? When I squint, does it bother you? Well, don't make me squint, and then it'll bother you less. I helped my good friend with taking care of her son while we were visiting Arkansas this past summer. I had him sitting outside with me on a porch chair facing me the night we stayed in the Airbnb. We had finished looking at the fireflies that night. There's something that almost makes complete sense when I look at a baby in my lap. He balances atop my knees, his little legs lying in front of him across mine, his feet touching my abdomen. I sit in the lawn chair and I hold him up by his sides, grabbing him under both his armpits while we stare at each other. Everybody loves you. Your mom would do anything for you. Most people would do anything for you, in case you didn't know. He's a baby, so he says nothing. You'll be taller than your mom and me one day, a lot taller. You'll tower over everybody in the room and need extra leg space. You'll help people reach the top shelves and have horrible, horrible growing pains. Maybe you'll play basketball if that's your thing. You'll be a man one day. Could you be a nice one? He's a baby, so he says nothing. The breeze is nice and the sun is setting. You won't remember me saying this, but I think I've been you before. I've been small, 2 feet tall. I needed to be carried and taught how to live and taught how to stop trying to hurt myself. Somebody needed to make a bed for me, and did. But I can't remember what it's like. Do you think you could remind me? Maybe when you get to talking, you can remind me. Nobody remembers, but everybody has been you. But there's no way you will end up exactly like any of us. Isn't that so strange? Can you try to remember when you start speaking, yeah? He coughs, and I take that as a good enough answer. I work to pick myself up off the lawn chair while holding him with both hands, sighing at the effort and placing him on my right hip before walking back inside. I've been thinking about ways to save the world. I confide in him. And I think I'm going about it all wrong. I'm gonna tell your mom to come outside with us to look at the fireflies. Maybe when we're all standing by the tree, you can start to jog our memory. Maybe that's where we can start. Thank you.
We have nonfiction, fiction, and now fiction and poetry. Okay.
Hi y'all, I'm Samantha Owen. I'm a sophomore English major. My parents are from Weatherford, but I grew up in Southeast Asia. And y'all are gonna be so sick of listening to my voice by the time I'm done. I have a prose piece and then 3 poetry pieces. Okay, this is the prose piece. F1 visas. It was sudden, the shift. Some ruling passed, some speech was made. More of the same everyday outrage. But then, in less than a day, people began to disappear. Days took dozens away, little warning, little explanation, little notice by some, much change for others. The whispers came first, professors huddled in corners, memorizing numbers to call. Students stressed in clusters, victims to all-nighters driven not by procrastination, but by panic. Hagar hurried past a group of such, scrambling for her keys. As her frantic mind sent metal clattering to the floor, she found herself staring into red-stained eyes. Her chest tightened, and her claustrophobic heart pounded, petrified that these were not new eyes. Was it a dream? Hagar couldn't recall anything beyond the last few days as truth. Did feral eyes once belong to a laughing girl? Had they not spent the break together, roaming the empty dorm? Had they not lamented over the too-long flight home? The eyes cried for recognition Hagar couldn't muster, so the cursed keys found themselves abandoned on the carpet, the fresh prey of empty eyes. Perhaps the university at large would be less acquainted with fear. Nope. The echoes of screaming followed after Hagar. Chanting filled campuses and protest filled screens, rage radiated in articles, and anxiety permeated classrooms. No longer a great land of opportunity, now known across the seas for broken promises and false assurances. Rumors slithered around the grounds of men carrying chains made for a slight South Asian accent. Hagar heard the resounding resentment from the stairs. She stopped to gaze at the missing numbers above the door, the proof of their past presence found only in the slightly less dark paint. Forcing herself inside, she was confronted by the cacophony of a young man forcing his frustration on students in the same position. It was just supposed to be a filler class, a course to subdue the university's core curriculum, an English credit obscure enough to be intriguing and new enough to have a professor unprepared to properly torture biology majors. But what a time it was proving to take Asian American literature. The professor's arrival only amplified the boy's emotion. She withstood the assault of his words, saying that his anger was his right. She interrupted the rampage with her own address to the class, informing them that the university would obey first and protect second, if at all. Protect from what? What was coming for them? Hagar fixated on the fuming boy, a mild headache turning into a migraine. The increasing blackness left only one spot of visibility, an angry boy whose loud voice hadn't changed the reality. She was here to learn. She waited months for the sacred piece of paper. She paid from her pocket. She didn't work. Just like their expectations outlined, she didn't take the holy American jobs. Others did, but never Hagar. She played every card to perfection. She was a cash cow for American universities, never taking, always giving. What did she, the ideal immigrant, possibly have to fear? Without question, all the noise was swallowed up in silence. Hiding might not rectify the situation, but it might allow some to slip through the cracks, to remain, to finish the term. No lecture occurred. It was replaced by a transaction of communal information, rumors, emails, experiences. Hagar's skull throbbed, and her vision blurred to the point of watering. Her being was, with ever-increasing volume, begging her to lay down, to rest, to ignore the voices. The last thing she remembered was his face smearing beyond recognition. His eyebrows became one, his black hair faded. She couldn't recall if he once had a mouth. Then he, too, disappeared. In Hagar's hallucinations, the whispers and screams didn't come in waves. They started and wouldn't stop, growing more and more hysterical as the silence rang louder, swirling fear, dominating unknowns, unobtainable answers. It was 8 a.m, and every face Hagar passed was exactly the same. Each pair of eyes trained straight ahead, scurrying to get to some awful course they all regretted by the second week of the term. Why did they think an early class would increase their productivity? It just plummeted their GPAs. Hagar, however, hadn't worried about her GPA in weeks. If it was all going to be lost, what did it matter? What a privilege to carry a percentage as one's greatest concern. Over the past 2 years, she had adjusted to this isolated culture. She had learned to ignore, to neglect, to look to herself first and only. She had become a citizen in nearly every sense. Eyes straight, AirPods in, perfectly American, perfectly alone. Existing within the crowd of separate shades almost calmed Hagar. But understanding the crowd as a deity was accompanied by the knowledge that she was a detached entity entirely. By no choice of her own, she was vulnerable. All she could do was walk and carry on, as per usual, pretending she wasn't aware that this America was, when convenient, for Americans only. Her devotion, her behavior, her brilliance, none of this would change the color of an all-too green card. When you are a guest, contracts can be revoked for seemingly no reason. Men with chains designed for South Asian accents would find a reason again, when convenient. So Hagar kept walking, past peers who looked confused when the term F1 visa was mentioned, past academic buildings who claimed to facilitate free discussion, past tables with penguin suits preaching on the importance of self-reliance. And she kept walking, past empty rooms of revoked visa holders, past the bathrooms that witnessed the last panic attack before deportation, past posters pleading for some ruling to be overturned. The thing about walking, in Hagar's case, was that the road ends and gravity takes over. She didn't see the edge. Perhaps her vision was too blurred, the voices in her mind too silent and too loud. Another foreign body disappeared. And now you'll get to listen to me read poetry. Okay, they never taught me to grieve. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. The end comes in flashes. He will take you as he must. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to take you home. No last-minute lariat, I can't keep you from where you have to go. Streets of gold and pearly gates, I'll be left holding scraps of a mold. Parting gifts contributing to the rising rate, your memory lives on. Headstones don't sell saying you're gone. Here's your piece of sacred lawn. How does a memory live on? And the second piece is I remember. I remember being 6 and getting calls on the street, shrinking from their eyes in my car seat. I remember being 7 and having seniors look under my skirt. Step 1 to hating school. I remember being 8 and having older boys not let me leave, bikes blocking my way home. I remember being 10 and having lovely names bombard me. How kind of them to keep me humble. I remember being 11 and using my fists. Good thing actions speak louder. I remember being 12 and seeing sex associated with my skin, learning to expect the worst from boys and men. I remember being 15 and not eating. Hunger could numb if nothing else would. I remember being 16 and having a guard with wondering hands, months after the upperclassmen who couldn't hear no. Now I'm 17, and my memories infiltrate my dreams. So call it insomnia or call it an overactive mind, but I've stopped seeing any sleep as kind. Okay, last one, I promise. I want to be a lie. I want to be a work of fiction, to radiate some romantic depiction, to exist confined in beautiful diction, to function on unexplained conviction, to blame fate for my life's malediction, to not have to pinpoint my own affliction, to be sutured as a contradiction. I want to be a writer's fabrication, to be compared to some celestial formation, to be the implication of infatuation, to have the freedom of read between the lines clarification, to escape originality and exist as an imitation, to be the aftermath of an education, to be the concoction of hallucination. I want to be an editor's reputation, to inflict some poor man's sleep deprivation, to be worth analyzing my motivation, to be the confusion of illumination, to be late-night language left up to interpretation, to possess some preordained revelation, to provide relatability in the lack of salvation. I want to be a poet's verse, presented as truth in reverse, depicting this reality of life's curse, simulating a need to recite and rehearse, characterized as for better or for worse, licking the wounds left to nurse, acting as flowers do for a hearse. Thank you.
We have poetry from Kate.
Yes. My name is Kate Pontius. I'm going to read 2 poems. I'm mostly a recreational poet. I'm a freshman English major from the Woodlands. I hope to get published one day. A lot of authors I admire tend to lean towards being psychological or very dreamlike, and I love taking into account opaque internal landscape that can lead us to do the things that we end up doing. So my first poem is called Ashley Kim. It's about a real girl who was shot by her little brother. So it's just titled Ashley Kim. My little brother is pointing a gun at me, the snout of the warm, forever dog, lips parted, gunpowder breath, hot on my face. I am sorry. I cannot see his eyes as he unloads eternity into my torso. I can only hear my mother screaming my soul up past heaven, past Christmas. I slide through the chamber, spit dizzy on the carpet floor. There is no blood. I died long before 8 rounds, crinkled my chest like wrapping paper. And then my second poem is a little less objective. It's called Gethsemane. Driving home alone, street lamps make lightning rivers between the curtains of my eyes, and I think to myself that I am grieving a terrible loss that will dawn on me slowly for the rest of my life, and I imagine you home, nursing your own little fears asleep, as my headlights paint dandelion shapes across the garage door. There were times when you might have vowed to hold me as the stars came out one by one, but now the night is dark and the moon is rising and the olive trees are bending their ruddy faces to the west, and I am kneeling alone in the garden of change, with my hands held high above my head whispering, "Let this grief leave me, let it pass." These are the silent hours in which no voice makes an echo return, and the verdict does not change, even for the churning and the aching of the heart.
Thank you very much. The Garden of Change makes me think we're all in that here, that each one of your works has an aspect of that. That there's a change in perspective, a change in knowing, a change in how people are treated or think about something, the past or the present or the future. But before we continue, there might be someone who has a train of thought that may have been briefly interrupted, and you're ready for a question for our group here, or an individual. Any questions first up?
I can ask one. I'm just curious how y'all chose the pieces for today. Like, was there a specific project that you wrote them for? Any reason that you picked the ones you did?
Should we just go like down the line? So mine was an exploration of creative nonfiction, because I used to only focus on fiction writing. And so this was me trying to branch out and explore my creative nonfiction writing freshman year. And I picked it for today because I think just in the topic of mental wellness, I mean, I think it's something not only that obviously is an ailment for older generations, but it also is something that is very concerning to us presently. The loss of memory, sort of, or if we're watching other family members sort of combat this, it's something that's an ever-present kind of concern for us. And so my thought process moving through it, I thought was a very kind of deep exploration of the mind and some of our darkest worries, per se. So that's why I picked it for this today.
Yeah, it was the most recent thing that I've written, but I think it was convenient because one of the things we could talk about was identity, and I wrote it in a moment of coming back to school, and I always felt a bit of a culture shock every single time I moved back to A&M. Not saying that's like a bad or good thing, it's just what happened. And I guess the first like half of what I wrote is just kind of that like weird middle ground of like, I've been here before, but it's still weird. It's my senior year, so I've like gone back multiple times. And every single time coming here, it's like a good few months, I'm like, whoa, this is like a whole different life. And then going back home, it's again another few months of like, whoa, this is so different. So it's very strange, but I feel like it went along with the theme of identity. Yeah.
My prose piece dealt a lot with immigration issues, and I had a lot of friends last semester who had a lot of anxiety and unknowns dealing with that kind of thing. And so I felt that would relate to mental health. Two of my poems dealt with grief and with assault, and that can definitely affect your mental health severely. So I felt like that related.
Yeah, I just wanted to choose two different sides. Like, the first poem was very external, like this is happening because of what is happening internally. It's manifested in this event, and it's horrible, but it's just something that happened. And then I wanted to pick a second poem that was more like internal. Nothing necessarily happens, but it's just kind of like a change, like a shift mentally.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I'm honored to be here.
I had a sort of a general question. One of the things that I heard, in addition to what Dr. Harris was saying, is the question of care. And so I have a couple of things. I'm just thinking about Elana Lee's piece. You had memory care home, and you talked about sort of carefree childless, not having a care in the world, and also about the stigma of Alzheimer's, and so people that are moving to, that are becoming monstrous. You mentioned the Beauty and the Beast, and them being, distanced, and it's all this process of loss. And what you were doing was this kind of what I was hearing was like a recuperation of how you were with your grandmother, and so though you have this anticipatory grief, you're in the moments when that she's in. And then I forgot your first name. I'm so sorry. Alyssa, of course. And thinking about when you were mentioning like this idea of saving the world, right? And so what is, how does that fit in with care? And Sam talking about thinking about all of them in the university piece. Like, I think we're living in a time too, like, can a university care, or how can a university care? Such a big thing right now on this campus and on as others. And then I'm thinking about carelessness, and so the fact that there's in terms of guns, right? And so like who's responsible and who, how should we be taking care? So that was me thinking out loud about like a thread that I heard. So I'm wondering if you could, how you guys each think about how you think about care in relationship either to the piece that you wrote or about writing as perhaps a form of care, giving, taking, I don't know, so just kind of throwing that out.
There's,
Sorry.
Go for it.
well, I feel like it's from a movie, I forget where the quote is from, where there's a nun talking to a woman and she says, something like, what if I don't love him? What if he's just paying attention to me? And she says, isn't love and attention the same thing? And I think writing is like taking the world and paying such close attention to it, and that just like, it becomes love, even if you don't mean it to.
I was going to say, in terms of mine, I think one of the things that also is kind of important is being able to take care of yourself whenever you're in situations. And so, like, for instance, this was a very difficult thing for me to overcome when I was a child and I was losing sort of my idea of my grandma that I had. And sometimes you have to really put effort into reframing things because you see them at their worst. You see them as the most negative, the most scary. And it took me a long time, kind of as evidence through this paper, like, to actually understand that there is beauty to it. There are positive aspects, but that doesn't always come easy. That's not always the first thing you see. So putting effort and actually taking the time to care enough to see things in the better light is sometimes what you need as someone that's processing these things as well.
I like that. Sorry. I work with children a lot, mostly at the middle grades. And like I spoke about in this writing, my really good friend has a baby at the moment. He's turning 1 in a few days, so I'm really excited. So I really like taking on that. There's like a strange role as a young woman being a caretaker for this very, very small boy. And there's so many things of like, you forget that you really don't know how to do anything. I mean, he didn't know how to breathe. We had to like, he would hold his breath and we would have to blow in his face over and over for him to breathe. And he doesn't know how to like, he'll gag himself. He'll try to crawl off the side of like whatever. And it's so like, it sounds like, yeah, of course I knew this, baby, just don't know anything. But whenever you're actually like handling a child, it's so insane of how much you just care. Like it's like a thing, this isn't even if I didn't know this child, there's just so much, like I would literally do anything for this baby. And I don't know if that's like a worldwide like phenomenon, but I do know a lot of people feel the same way. And I think there's something so like strange in that it's a young boy and, you know, I'm taking care of him, and then everybody kind of had to be in this position where somebody had to care about you so much, but you can kind of grow up to be, especially as a boy, you can grow up to be a man that's not so nice to women, unfortunately, which is unfortunately kind of common. And it's very strange of like, he's little right now, and he's so cute, and he's so harmless, and I just learn so much from him every single day. But you can, it's kind of not at this exact same as like grief, like anticipatory grief, but kind of a fear or like a paranoia of like, no matter how much we care for you, we really don't know how you're gonna feel whenever you're of an age where you have more power. But I still think this like pure level of care, even if you don't know how a baby's gonna turn out, you're still gonna care for it at that level. is I feel like we can all learn from it in, I don't exactly know what kind of way, but in some way I feel like I've learned a lot, but I'm not able to really put it in words, I guess. Yeah.
I'd like to speak to just impact of hearing these stories. Just noticing, like, as the readings came to a close, feeling this immense sense of urgency to act, like some urgency to get back to Colorado, to be with my child, to make sure she's safe hearing your story. Urgency to create memories with my aging mother and make sure she's connected enough with my daughter. Like urgency to be in relationship and to really feel those relationships. Urgency to feel connected to protection, as well as, you know, the protect and obey thing. It's like the urgency to connect with community, to preserve the safety of the people who are here. Like, so just kind of sharing, like, hearing your stories makes me want to jump out of my seat and run and be a part of my life in a deeper way. And I'm just kind of opening this question of, like, what is the hope of the impact you have when you share something personal in your writing?
Oh, that is a very interesting question. And I don't have an exact answer, because one of my hopes is that it reaches people, but I can't always say how that will be. And so it's sort of like kind of making a little butterfly and letting it go, so to speak. It's not kind of up to me how it's received. And so when I present my writing, I've poured a lot of emotion and memory and a lot of myself into it. But what I hope comes across is the universality of what I'm saying, not just the personal part of it. And in that, it means it can take any form when people hear it. But I want there to be a more universal, relatable truth to what I'm saying that hopefully transmits.
I'm a very sensitive and sentimental person, and sometimes I try to write in like a more moody way or a darker way, and it always comes back to like this kind of optimism. And I think usually when I write, I'm not thinking too much about people that are reading it, but whenever I do write something that I do share with people, most of the time it has like a kind of optimism at the end, and I can't really help it. And I think one of my favorite authors is Mitch Albom, and he's like, it's like reading a Hallmark card that's a whole novel. Like, that's what it feels like to read Mitch Albom. And it's kind of cheesy at some points. You're like, okay, but then at the end, he always makes me cry. Like, at the end, he always gets me, like, no matter how cheesy the whole thing is. And I think there's something kind of like grounding about that, about feeling like at the end of the day, like, well, like, okay, like, I guess that's it. And we got to, get together and start, being nicer to people and trying to help people at, all these bad things are happening, but there's got to be some kind of solution, because there's no point in thinking that there's not. And so I guess I would hope that people kind of understand that's what I'm trying to say sometimes, and maybe, hopefully, that would make them feel a similar way, because I feel like optimism is very important. Yeah.
I think the works of literature that have most impacted me are the ones that make me deeply uncomfortable. I think that those are the ones that I share with my friends. It's not the happy mom and dad went down the street. This is an injustice that's occurring, and it makes you feel like you need to do something about it, like what you were saying. So I think that I'd like it if my writing would make people uncomfortable.
That's an important lesson for everybody. For sure.
Sometimes I ask myself, like, why do I feel such like a compulsive need to share the things that I make? Because they are for me in a lot of ways. And I've wondered before if it was selfish, like a selfish desire, which is okay, but I'm just questioning myself. And I've come to the conclusion that, like, the reason I like the authors that I like is because they're leaving little, like, landmarks and like little hashes and trees of places I'm going mentally. And it's so lonely to be a human and to think the things that you think. And there's so many of us, but we're all so alone. And I think that just relying on the idea that if I'm here, then someone else later is going to be here, and leaving like my hash on the tree and saying, look, like you're not the only one, is invaluable to that person in the future.
So part of making that connection that you're doing with both the reading of your writing and your writing to begin with had a lot of selection involved, and some of that was based on biography, people you knew, events that happened. Some of it was invented. But it seemed like everybody here actually had, whether creative nonfiction, fiction, poetry, had some element that was, from recorded experience in some way. So I was wondering if people could talk a little bit about sort of their choices in what they selected for both having, the power of a feeling of authentic disclosure and detail, but also what made it still fun for you to write and compelling and disturbing, all those things together. Like, would you share a little more about your process of doing it, the selections you chose, and maybe something that got left out, or you turned away from, or you turned back to?
Well, for me, my grandma is an extremely important part of my life. She's who I'm named after, and she sort of was another me. And so we had this very deep connection ever since I was little. And she was also sort of the first, the losing of her kind of memory, mind, and then eventually her, was the first real close personal loss that I experienced. And so that altogether makes it very personal for me. And in that, there's already just so many like emotions and things to dive into. So picking that to write about is always just very compelling. Like immediately, I want to write about her. I want to share this experience. And I also know that it is something that is deeply personal for everybody, because everybody has people in their life that they've lost, or especially people that go through this, because I know this is a very kind of common phenomenon to have somebody that has memory loss or Alzheimer's or dementia or anything like that. And so in writing about that, I tried to include very specific details about her in order to preserve who she was uniquely as a person, but also to make her relatable, because whatever detail you include, there's somebody else that has a similar detail. Like maybe they didn't eat ice cream sandwiches for breakfast, but they had cupcakes in the afternoon. Like, I'm just making that up, but something like that. Like, everybody has these personal details that they remember about their loved one. And so I always try to include that, not so much to make it only about her, but to make it even more universal in the way that it comes across. And so in writing this, it's sort of sharing a part of myself, and I always love writing about my grandma.
I think the more personal part of it was talking about this trip that I took with my friend. And before that trip, it was over the summer, I've listened to the news a lot, but I was making it a habit to listen to it every morning. And a lot of people are usually a bit wary to listen to the news every single day because people say it's depressing. And I understand that sentiment too, but I think I would wake up every morning, I'd literally have this routine. I'd put my phone, I'd put on a podcast of the news, and I'd do my breakfast. And it was again, this is the thing everybody says, but everybody, you kind of say it and you forget the actual meaning behind it, kind of thing, where there's just so much happening everywhere. I mean, there's injustices happening literally next door and millions of miles away, and it's hard to say that one's more important than the other. And it's that's where I had this idea of I wish I could just, not me specifically, but I wish there was a way just to save the entire world. And I just watched Superman. Superman came out over the summer. And he literally, that idea that he can literally go next door, help this person, go travel immediately across the country to go help somebody else was so such an appealing idea, and so frustrating because you can't do that. Especially as an individual, there's no way you can do that. And so I was just very frustrated every time I listened to the news. And again, I went on this trip with my friend. We went to the Ozarks. It's a very grounding trip, and I got to take care of him and be with my friend. And it was just kind of not stepping away from the world, but coming to it in a new kind of way of looking at the very root of like people of, you know, that sounds dramatic, but it's like the root of people. Everybody was this small at some point, and this was before you're kind of set in your ways. And I think there's something like really important of like looking at somebody before they have an opinion about anybody yet. And I think there's something to be learned about not necessarily not having opinions, but not being so set in your ways about people, because I myself can be very set in my ways about if somebody likes a certain thing, or they have a certain, they vote for a certain person or whatever. I can be I feel like most people can be very quick to say, oh, you're this, and you're this. And it's from like both sides. But, you know, a baby doesn't know all that yet. A baby just knows I see all these people around me. And not saying that's like good or bad, but I feel like there's something nice about not having that yet, that maybe like that's where we can start actually having compassion for others and helping people on a basic human to human level. And yeah, that's why I included that part, just because in my head, this is like, it makes sense in my head, but it's kind of hard. But yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry, it was a lot. But basically, how you made your choices and selection in terms of drawing from lived experience versus invention, transformation, your imagination. So what the process was for that.
I think a lot of writers are selfish, and I think a lot of writers are narcissists, and I think that they want to talk about themselves. I definitely want to talk about myself. So I think that it's a good release for that, but I also think that it helps, articulation helps you to process things that are hard to process. By putting it on paper, you're releasing it. And I think that that's really good for the writer, but it's also good for the people reading it, because, oh, people have common experiences with me, like what you were saying earlier. It's a sense of community, and it's a sense of release.
So for instance, the narrative that you wrote, you said it was partly to express some of what you've been hearing about, from friends, but was that particular narrative invented then?
Yes.
Okay, so it connected, but it was still your invention that sort of met the feelings of it.
Yeah, I actually took Asian American literature, so that part was me. But I had a lot of friends who are international students. It's easier for me to connect with international students because I grew up internationally. And so I was drawing from a lot of conversations from them. There was a lot of stuff in the news with people with F1 visas losing them with little warning, and then having, like, kids wouldn't go home over break because they wouldn't be allowed re-entry. And that relates to something that I went through during COVID, where my dad had that same kind of visa, and he couldn't leave the country because he wouldn't be allowed back in for who knows how long. So that was a personal connection, but it was fiction.
For Ashley Kim, it kind of seems out of nowhere, but I read about her story, and I have little brothers, you know, and it's just, you know, I guess I felt very personally, I felt a very personal connection to her, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, obviously, but I think that true crime and crime is so focused on, even though we say it's about the victim, it's not really, and just trying to look at the victim, you know, as someone who loved and will be missed. And then I sent my poems to my dad, like the ones I was going to choose, and he was like, gosh, they're so sad. Why? And I thought about that question for a long time last week, because I was like, yeah, that's a good question. And I came to the conclusion, just something I read by Mary Oliver a long time ago, and she says, you know, grief has a lot of words in it, and I keep coming back to grief, I think, because joy is inarticulate. Like, it's, you know, you don't have to necessarily say things about joy. It's like sounds or feelings, but grief can be explained and is often explained. So
I don't know who said this, but it's more by more than one person that the grief itself, it shows there's love underneath it. You wouldn't be grieving if you didn't love. Other thoughts, questions, comments on our readers?
I just wanted to say, I mean, thank you for all this, but I'm thinking too about all the ways you guys are caring by writing and what you're writing about, from the disturbing and the uncomfortable and the lonely, the recuperable, the hopeful, the, you know, the resilience, you know, the memory, the connections and so forth. And so it seems that, you know, the choices that you're making, writing the beautiful pieces that you shared with us today, the ways that you read them, but they're acts of empathy, and you know, you said connection, compassion was another word used, but and even activism, you know, wanting to disrupt and wanting to, you know, it may not even be about your personal experience. So thank you for all the ways that you're caring and sharing this with us.
And if you wanted to share some final questions for each other or thoughts? Good job, everybody. Thanks for being here.